two, one. Everybody, it is a treat. I am talking to a legend in this field. This is Fraser Cain. His inaugural appearance on my channel, although
Yeah.
he's hosted me so many times. I really feel guilty, Fraser. I mean, I'm filled with
Well,
guilt all the time, but more so today. Thank you for coming on.
well, that's good. I mean, I was pretty implicit about it last time. I'm like, this is the last time I interview you until you interview me, and then we're square, and we can continue on with this natural cycle that we have together.
We had this Calendly battle where we send each other links.
Exactly.
I send
Yeah.
you a Zoom invite. No, I send you a Zoom.
Yeah.
F that.
Tell me when your calendar's open. Yeah.
The ultimate
Yeah.
flex is I
Yeah.
will have my assistant use her flip phone or his flip phone to set up an interview with your assistant.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't have an assistant. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh,
The
sorry.
universe today empire is being stronger every day. Anyway, Fraser, this is such a treat. I want to get into so many things with you. I want to talk about your
Yeah.
origin story. I want to talk about what excites you the most about our universe. I want to talk about your phenomenal career and your writing, which inspires me and millions around the world. And you're so prolific, it kind of, it puts Hemingway to shame. And I really want to use this to encourage you to, to turn your interviews and everything that you do into a book that's not many years in the past, but a new book. And then I can have you back on to do
Right.
a segment that I call Judging Books by Their Covers. We'll hold that for...
So is that it? That's the real I
the...
can't come back on until I've written another book. That's your gateway that I have to pass through. Yeah, that makes sense.
No, but seriously, you do so much cool stuff, and like partially, I've been looking forward to this for weeks since I was on your show, and that episode, I think it was your most popular episode that whole day. It was incredible. It got 10,000 views within the first 3 months. It's just that,
definitely one of the more successful interviews that I've done was the conversation with you. So,
yeah,
really
I was joking. I was saying it was the most popular video of your video that particular day only. You've had so many incredible interviews.
No. It was one of the most successful interviews that I've done.
Oh, well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But after the interview, after we turned off the mics, we did a BTS, kind of thing where you're talking and you give me some life advice, and I want to turn to that later about where you see things. But I want to get to know you and have my audience is only the square root of your audience, but they're the best in the universe, of course. But I want to start with your origin story. What got you into astronomy? And what brought you to where you are today, up there in the Great White North, or soon to be White North, hopefully?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always been into astronomy as long as I can remember. Like I had a copy of Our Universe, the Time Life book. I don't know if you remember this.
Yeah.
That I would just would go and watch meteor showers with my parents. I would watch science fiction, Star Trek. I went through my dad's science fiction books on his shelves when I was old enough to start taking on novels. I watched the first space shuttle launch in 1981. I bought my own telescope when I was like 13 years old. And the nerdiest thing is that when I was in high school, I took the journalism program. It was like a 3-year program while I was in high school. And I did a column on astronomy every month for the years that I was in high school, what you could see in the night sky, new discoveries in space and astronomy. It was hilarious. And then for some weird reason, I didn't continue on in that vein like you did.
Yeah.
I decided it would be a lot more practical for me to go and take engineering. And then I shifted over to computer science and then was in sort of the computer field for many years. But I was always interested in space and astronomy. And I was at this point where I realized that my knowledge was sort of stuck at a 6-year-old reading Our Universe, and I wanted to progress in what I understood about the current state of space and astronomy. I had The Case for Mars in one hand, written by Bob Zubrin, and I had Pale Blue Dot by Carl Sagan. I read both those books. I got really inspired.
Classic.
And I decided, well, I'm just going to start a website on the side where I explain concepts in space and astronomy, and by doing so I will learn. And I just did it as a side gig while I was doing my main job. And within about a year, I was like, okay, this is all I want to do with the rest of my life. Like, whatever it's going to take, I need to stop helping banks make websites and I need to start being a space journalist. And that was 1999. So I'm closing in on 24 years now of doing this.
So the dark web's loss is astronomy's gain.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, one of the things, whenever I think about you, as I often do, I think that you have exceptional taste. And I'm not just saying this, because you've had me on so many times, but you actually
Hmm.
have like a very highly curated list of topics. The way that you do your live streams, your Q and A's, and I wanted to ask you first: how do you know when something is hype and something is legitimate? How do you filter that
Hmm.
out? What's the Kane method? Tell me, please.
Well, I mean, it's funny. It's people like you, actually. I have a council of experts because, like, my background is in computer science. So
Yeah.
I can help figure out if I think an AI technology is going to be nonsense or if someone has truly proved that P equals not equal to NP. But my when I started, I very much came to it from a science fiction enthusiasm state. Wormholes, white holes, black, faster than warp speed, whatever Star Trek told me was true. And I was really lucky to have a bunch of astrophysicists that I got a chance to talk with. Dr. Pamela Gay was a good example. We did
Yeah.
Astronomy Cast. And if you go back to the early episodes, I am just the why are the real laws of physics that we have to obey. And then I was friends with Phil Plait, work debunking stuff. And then I've had a chance to do a lot of correspondence with Ethan Siegel, starts with a bang, Dr. Paul Sutter, Brian Koberline, who writes with us at Universe Today, and you get your wrist slapped enough times that you start to able to strike that balance between a genuine enthusiasm for interesting things that are happening in space and astronomy and a reckless optimism for things that aren't really science. And I think the more I think there's this cycle that people go in where they first start out and they're like, I want to talk about Dyson spheres, you know, and you're like, okay, sure. Yeah, we can talk about that. If that's what you're into, by all means. But then after a while, if they've checked their watch and it's been a week later and there's no Dyson spheres that have shown up, they'll be like, okay, well then let's talk about this DART mission thing. And now we're cooking. Now we've got some interesting space news that is unfolding and changing, and there's new discoveries being made. And that's what I get really excited about now is just like this perfect balance between what are we doing now and what's coming up next? What are the big mysteries that we have, and where might we find those answers in a way that's practical that we might get somewhere within our lives?
Mm. Talk to me about like how you distinguish between the ultimately popular. I find this phenomenon. I think it's called audience capture, where you have just kind of a topic that is going to be garnering you a lot of views, and yet it may not be along the lines of something that you find as legitimate as some of your other topics. I mean, you mentioned Dyson spheres. I can't resist. Freeman Dyson was the first guest on the Into the Impossible podcast, um, and
Yeah.
uh, and of course he had his kind of more far out ideas and more close ideas. But
Yeah.
lately in the zeitgeist, as they say, has been percolating this notion that we are routinely being visited by alien artifacts and
Mm.
crafts, and I've had on some of the big names in the skeptic field, from Mick West, Michael
Hmm.
Shermer, but I've also had on a lot of people that are proponents of it and really believe that we are being visited by physics of the 29th century or something like. How do you know how to strike the balance? Because you also will have legitimate scientists that present fact based research. I've had on more maybe. Let me ask you: would you have on my past guest Tom DeLong? I mean, he was on the show. I got a lot of flack for that. It actually is my most
I
popular.
don't think I would.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I'm sure it was
so
popular, but I
yeah,
probably wouldn't. No.
and people want to have a part
Yeah.
two, and I'm like, I got as much. But I before I ask you if how you would react to that, I just want to say that I did get him to actually answer some factual questions that even Joe Rogan never asked him, like, what is the provenance of the alien artifacts that you have? And he actually
Yeah.
admitted for the first time, I think, that he can't prove a linear
Yeah.
chain of command from start to finish. Anyway, how do you know how to have
Yeah.
that balance? Aliens are super popular nowadays. There is a UAP study being undertaken by the president of the Simons Foundation, my ultimate boss, David Spergel, along with my colleague Shelley Wright here at UC San Diego.
Hmm. Hmm.
How do you know when to when to lean into what your audience wants and what you personally may or may not be interested in?
So I am not super interested in trying to do stuff that the audience wants. I'm Everything I do is my curiosity. Like if I'm not curious about this, if this is what I'm obsessing about right now, it just doesn't happen.
Mhm.
So it's really simple. It's just like whatever I'm curious about, whatever ideas I'm ruminating on right now are what I will book interviews with people. I will uh choose those as topics for the news segments that I'm it's every part. Like it's what we're covering on Universe Today, it's who I'm interviewing, it's the kinds of questions I'm gravitating towards answering. It's just what I'm following my curiosity, and it hasn't steered me wrong so far.
Mm.
And that the conversation that you have with the viewers, and I'm sure you have the same one, that they're in the chat and they're asking you for follow-up questions, you will eventually reach the place of curiosity again. Like you might know the answers to the simple questions about um the like signals that are in the cosmic microwave background radiation, etc. But you could have a conversation with someone, if they just kept asking you questions, you would get to a place where you're like, I don't know, I'm curious again. Even something that you know, a field that you know quite well, if a person can dig and be curious after a while, it's kind of infectious. So I don't really, it's driven by my curiosity, not driven by me trying to optimize what I think other people want to hear. Um, and I think that's important. As it sort of back to your idea about skepticism, like this idea of are we alone in the universe is a scientific question, and anyone who tells you that it isn't is ridiculous. It is absolutely a scientific question, right? We're here, we're on Earth, life's everywhere, it's a big universe. Where's all the life? How could we search for life? And I spend a ton of time investigating that question with the kinds of people that I talk to, etc. But when a person has anecdotal evidence for something that they think they've seen, I don't find that compelling. And so you have to just kind of strike that balance of like, what
Yeah,
is the kind of evidence? What are the kind of questions? What would it take to convince you? Like, are there artifacts of alien civilizations here in the solar system? That's a really good question.
yeah,
And it's a really, like, if there was one way that aliens would travel from star system to star system, they would send self-replicating robot probes. It would be pumping out more robot probes. It would be in a place where there's a lot of minerals. Let's look in the asteroid belt. That's a really compelling idea to me.
yeah. The lurk.
Not Yeah, not that they're flying through the atmosphere and only a few people have seen them and so on. So I think it's
Hopefully they weren't lurking on whatever the asteroid that Dart smashed into, because that would be a kind of rude welcome to the solar system.
welcome to the solar system. Yeah, we caught you. Smash. Yeah. Yeah, so I think um you always have to strike this balance, and as you learn more, you realize where you want to sit on that conversation. And my curiosity, just following my curiosity, has never failed me
Yeah. Yeah,
that I know of.
I say this taste that's kind of remarkable, and I also think you have not to turn this into a mutual admiration society, but or a unidirectional admiration society, but the fact is you have a very large audience, and I think there's more sort of gravitas that like when I was small, like when I had Tom DeLonge on, or when I had on some more speculative gate names. I had 20,000 subscribers, and I treasure each. I fought hard for each and every one, but you have
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
400,000 plus the Universe Today audience, which is huge. Plus your huge following on Twitter and social. there is an extra level. I mean, do you you have this, kind of council of people that you talk to, but how does that weigh upon you? Because you can actually be influential in a way that a smaller channel may not be able to be.
I think that's a ridiculous thing to say to me, and
You're a
terrifying.
tastemaker. You're
So
a
so
kingmaker.
if you so if you think that I somehow have some kind of, although it does happen from time to time, like I'll reach out to someone and be like, dear Dr. So and so, my name is Fraser Cain. I'm the publisher of Universe Today. And they'd be like, I know who you are, Fraser. Yes, I'd like to do an interview. And then I'll talk to them and be like, yeah, I was your work was really influential to me while I was getting my PhD. And I'm just like, so I'm not worthy. Um, so I mean, like, what can I do, right? Like I'm a journalist. I'm not a scientist,
Right.
and I try to be really clear about that when I'm explaining concepts in space and astronomy, I am just a fancy word monkey who is able to repeat the kinds of discoveries that people like you make, right? You're the one who set up a telescope at the South Pole and tried to find out the polarity of the cosmic microwave background radiation, not me. And so it's my job to help you and people like you to be able to explain the work that you're doing in a way that it gets a fair shake from people out there.
Mhm.
Beyond that, I'm not a scientist, so I don't have any of that responsibility.
But there's a journalistic kind of overlay that is unique. I look at like what's my unfair advantage to whatever extent I have it. Well, I'm an actual scientist who's a professor, is tenured, and gives you some.
Yeah.
And I'm doing experiments. I'm working with cool students and scientists, literally on every continent on Earth. And but that's kind of like my unique thing. You're one of the few, in the science podcast. I mean, I've talked with Arvin and talked with Sabina, and I've talked with Dr. Becky, and they all have their unfair advantages. But I've always thought yours is that. I mean, you have this journalistic. It's not like a cakewalk to go on the podcast. I mean, you're not going to ask like, do you deny the allegations against you made by those 14 Sherpas? And
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to do that. But you have a journalistic kind of mentality, which I think is
Mhm.
your unfair advantage. I mean, I don't want to. Again, I don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think like my job, and I don't have to put people's feet to the fire very often,
Right.
but when I have to, I will. And I'm not trying to be mean about it, and I'm not trying to be a gotcha, and I'm not trying to generate controversy. But when I ask a person a question and they don't answer the question, it's really obvious to me that they just didn't answer the question. And I get to ask again and again and like am I, I could say like am I doing this wrong? Did you not catch the question that I just asked you? Because the answer you gave me was insufficient. Let me try again. And so, you don't want to have to pull out the journalism card because you want it to be a conversation.
Right.
And most of the time it's just educational. I don't know anything about what it is that they're talking about, or I know very little. And but if I have to, then I will.
Yeah.
And I suffer no consequences from that through because I don't have any professional interaction with them, right? It's not like I'm they're going to be approving my grant.
Right.
I'm independent. Universe Today is completely 100% independent. We have no allegiance to anybody. And so we can kind of float free you know, like a leaf in the wind.
Like a
And
tiny sphere floating through our solar system. But I do want to make
yeah,
sure
exactly.
people
Yeah.
do join your Patreon, as I am. I am a Moon member, I think, for many,
Thanks.
many, many, many trillions of microseconds. And but I do want to encourage people to support Fraser. The best way you can do that is follow his content, and then also there's a Patreon as well. We're talking with Fraser Cain, the proprietor of Universe Today. So many other things. Puts out so much content. But I noticed one thing that you do, and I don't know anything about you, religiously or otherwise, but it seems to me you take a Sabbath, you take a break every year
Mm.
from the
Hmm.
grind that is it. And you were very concrete. You were like, I'd like to have you on. I invited myself on again, last year,
Yeah.
and you're gracious. We say like I take a sabbatical basically for the whole month of August or most of August. What
July and August, 2
July and
months.
August? Okay, so
Yeah.
talk to me. Are you out there just like fly fishing on on the
No, I
Kennesaw
wish.
River in Vancouver? What are you doing? What does it mean to you to take that break? And how would you advise other STEM individuals? Most of my podcasts are young men,
Yeah,
20 to 60 or whatever, or older men, but they're in the
yeah,
STEM
yeah.
field. Advise them. Why is that so important? I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, like the our lives are spent doing a lot of administration, a lot of detail work, like a lot of just paddling to keep your head above water. But the most important impacts that we can make are the time that's spent in quiet contemplation, the time spent where there are no um, demands on your time, and you can think, and your ideas and thoughts can fully expand within the the space that is needed. And so, on the one hand, like while I'm walking in the forest or while I'm cutting down a tree with a chainsaw, um, my mind is expanding, and I am thinking very deeply about the work that I'm doing, and reflecting on what it is that I do. And I wouldn't have that time if I wouldn't have the chance to have those thoughts if I was just constantly just grinding all the time. So yeah, so we've been doing this. I've done this for 15 years. I let everybody know there's no meetings, there's no live streams, there's no podcasts, there's no nothing for July and August. We stop Astronomy Cast, we stop the Weekly Space Hangout, we stop my open space. It all just stops at the July 30th, and then we pick it all back up again September 1st. And it's 2 months that I get a chance to travel, to get away from having to be tied to a high speed internet connection. I mean, I'm sure you know what it's like. Like, you
Yeah.
can never be like, you're in a hotel and you're like, oh, I got a live stream, I got to figure this out. Like, that's not fun. So yeah, it's important to do that. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I think those sabbaticals exist, is that you've got to, or you'll just be spent spinning your wheels until you die.
Yeah, you'll burn out, and
Exactly.
then you have to put your oxygen mask on first, as they say, and I think that's a huge part of it. It's hard for people like me who's got a multiple careers and young kids and everything, because but I do find it so refreshing. And actually, I tell my students that I say, you may not work 7 days a week, but I'm almost like you must work 6 days a week. In other words, like
Yeah.
the fact that you earn a sabbatical is something that to be earned, and of course they get time off and they get travel and so forth. But I find that it's ultimately selfish for me to do that because they come back energized, refreshed with new ideas that serves to inspire me. And they have to try these hacks of like, oh, delete, get a turn all your icons black on your phone and white. It never works.
No, no,
Technology is great, and
no.
yeah,
There was I went on I've quit one job, and I went on this like trip to Europe, and I had to have been traveling for 2 months at the time. It was about 5 weeks at the time, and I was on a ferry boat in Greece, and I was reading a book, and I finally felt my brain unwind. It had been 5 weeks of me just being in a pressure cooker, and suddenly I was just like, oh, like suddenly the final piece, the last straw came off my back, right? And you feel it. And I don't think people realize just how wound up and tight they are all the time with all of the things that are going on. And yet it's those perceptions that you have to be able to make to make these fundamental shifts in what it is that you're doing, and to stay on top of things. So yeah, it's exciting.
and one of the signature kind of things of satisfaction in the behind the scenes segment of our interview that nobody ever heard or will hear, was kind of like I asked you, Fraser, where would you go with an infinite budget? And you want to recapitulate what you said? It was very kind of important for me to hear at the time.
Wait a second. Like, if I had an infinite budget
Oh,
for
or
space and
had like
astronomy?
if you had a huge budget, just like 10x what you have now, how would it affect your life,
Well,
University Day, the
oh,
podcast,
like me as a journal,
as a
nothing. Oh,
business?
right. So I probably said I wouldn't do anything.
Right.
I wouldn't
That's what
even
you
know what to
said.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that to me is like the hedonic treadmill. It's like, people, you get more subs, you want more subs, you get more money, you want more money. But it seems to me you're
Mhm.
kind of like that Zen mentality that like who's the happy man? It's he who's happy with what he has. And but I wonder though, like if you did kind of think crazily, I mean, like podcast interview on the moon or on the ISS. Like, what would be like a crazy 10x experience or 11x experience that maybe not like going to the moon or whatever yet, but what would be
Yeah.
like an interview besides yours truly for like the sixth time? What's like a dream kind of either interview or live stream or like something totally different, like short form content, or what do you dream?
Yeah.
You must, right?
Um, no, I don't. Like there was definitely a time when I'd be like, boy, I really wish I could reach out to Dr. Brian Keating and he would actually get back to me and we could do an interview together.
Uh-huh.
But I can do that now. And I'm just like, I'm shocked at the people that I've had a chance to talk to. No, I mean, you too, right? Nobel Prize winners, um, astronomers, authors, astronauts, space scientists. Like if this person exists and they have an email address, typically I can coordinate. There might be some nagging involved, but I can typically coordinate an interview with the person. Um, I I definitely feel like the coverage that we have on Universe today now is as good as it as I want it to be. I mean, it could definitely be a little better. I'm like, I look at stuff at Scientific America. I see some outlets which have vastly bigger budgets than me, and I think, okay, yeah, we could, but then I don't know if it would be sustainable. And so I wonder if they're just burning investor money. Like we are sustainable. We are unkillable in terms of a journalistic endeavor. And
Right.
that feels that's the balance that makes me the happiest is I don't want to, like if someone dropped $10 million on my lap, I'd be like, am I gonna have to pay this back? Like, how's this gonna work? I don't like.
My
I don't
kids
want to. I don't want to
have,
think about it. Like investors are a bad thing, in my opinion.
yeah.
So the
Oh,
more,
mhm.
I mean, I think like the thing is like when I get a chance, like we've had some really amazing writers join the team. Some people who've been legends in the field. Alan Boyle, who is sort of one of my mentors. Carolyn Collins Peterson, aka the space writer. Um, Nancy Atkinson is just about to write her 6,000th article for Universe Today. And so like I see a lot of these writers who I love to be able to bring on the team. And I think if I had more budget, then I could bring on even more writers and do more stuff. So
Mhm.
that's all.
Yeah, well, it's good to be satisfied with where you're at. What's been the most like surprising or interesting discovery this past year? And you can't use the letters JWST or
Yeah, I've
WEB.
got it.
You're not
I've
allowed.
got it. Yeah. Yeah, so this is an interview that I just did about a week ago, which was a guy named Dylan Brout from the Pantheon Plus team. And I'm sure you're familiar with
Yeah,
this, but Pantheon Plus is this database of 1,570 Type 1a supernova
yeah,
seen recently, but also ones that were seen back in 1998 and earlier that helped measure, like help figure out distance in the middle ranges of the universe. And the amount of precision and effort that went into building this database is really stunning, and the kinds of conclusions, like they were able to measure the presence of dark matter and dark energy to 5 sigma at various points in the universe. That's like a 1 in 3.6 million chance that they're wrong, which
right.
is very low. 5 sigma is an, is an ex, just an insanely good measurement. And so you've got this beautiful measurement about the expansion rate of the universe, the amount that dark matter and matter was pulling at the expansion of the universe. It's huge. It's huge. And I think that people, and I'm sure you get this as well, but people will just kind of show up and go like, I don't get dark matter. I don't like it. It's you scientists are wrong. You're just guessing. And you're like, no, no, like this has been measured to a level of precision that we can scarcely comprehend. And yet there it is.
Mm.
Sure, nobody knows what it is, but that's like future scientists' problem.
Well,
It's about measuring its existence with precision is beautiful. And I just found that so inspiring. I mean, we talked about this last time on our interview. We're like, I am such a fan of the observers, of the experimenters, of the people who are out there practically making the measurements beyond the theorists. Like I prefer the experimenters. I'll take a party full of experimenters over
Well, that
a party full of
the
theorists
old saying
any
is,
day of the week.
an experiment theorist only has to be right once to make a famous career. An
Yeah.
experimentalist only has to be wrong once to end their career. Although yeah, I'm proof of a counterfactual to that.
Well,
Um,
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
so I can't help but read one comment from one of the listeners. We're going to take questions, so I want you all to put your questions in the chat box in the live chat, and or you can put them on YouTube. I might get to that. But there's a young person that looks like listening from somewhere, maybe over in India, perhaps, talking about how magical it is to be able to do this during Diwali, which it is. Happy Diwali, Fraser. That's the festival
Yeah.
of light, which is very important to us. And how cool it is that a billion people are not watching this broadcast, but a billion people are celebrating this thing united, and that we're communicating at the speed of light nearabouts. All the way from North America there. I think it is pretty amazing. And I feel like it is a kind of confluence. And I claim it's, it's a moral obligation for scientists like me who get paid by the public to communicate in terms that the public can understand. Like if I was working, in an envelope making factory or whatever, and my boss comes up and says, Keating, what are you up to? Oh, yeah, you can't understand what I'm doing. It's very specialized.
Yeah. You can't.
No, I'd be fired in a
Yeah.
second, right? So, what do you
Yeah.
believe? Like when people say no, no, I don't want to come on. I mean, I'm on my fair share of rejections. I've actually been rejected from 100% of the living Nobel Prize winners in physics that are women. But they had good reasons. But like, how do you feel about that when there is kind of just like burning knowledge, and I understand why they did so completely, just burn out, whatever. Maybe someday I'll keep trying. But I want to ask you, if you do encounter kind of the resistance where there is some amazing result. Today I was just reading about a result from the ice cube neutrino experiment down
Yes.
at the South Pole, where I've been twice in my life and done some research
Oh
and
man.
know a lot of those guys and gals that work on that amazing. Looking at quantum gravity, and I'm like, I can't find like who to like. I know people on the project, but I don't know who would be like a good get, so to speak, not to
Yeah.
boost ratings or whatever, but
Mm-hmm.
to communicate as a layperson could understand it, but also knows the
Yeah.
science. How do you do that? How
So
give
I
me.
think you're overthinking it. I think you're totally overthinking it. Like I will see a paper.
Mhm.
There was a paper that I just read today about stars engulfing their planets. And I was like, I want to talk about that, please. Um, and so then I just look at who's the first name on the paper,
Yeah.
and I reached out to her and I sent her an email. And if she doesn't respond, then I'll try the second person on the paper, and then I'll do the third person. And so the person is not an established science communicator. They're not a household name. No one knows who they are, but many times those people have absolutely fascinating things to say, and they're even better than a person who does have a lot of experience because they have a lot of canned responses, and they're a little nervous and suspicious of talking to a journalist. But a person who hasn't been burned yet, you can have a really interesting and forthright conversation about the work that they're doing, and it's a joy. And so I place zero interest in who the person is.
Okay.
So it's more about I see a topic that is interesting to me. I reach out to the principal investigator of that project and I asked if I can do an interview with them. And I will check beforehand just to see if I can see some YouTube interviews, just to see if they've ever done anything, or like see them give a presentation at the American Astronomical Society or anything. But I don't do that math at all.
Wow.
And they're my favorite conversations by far. Like once again, I'll take an interview, I'll take a podcast full of no names than science stars, even though it won't necessarily bring in the traffic.
Right.
It's going to be a fascinating conversation with somebody who has fresh things to say, and you can have a very natural conversation with them. So that would be, if I was to give you some advice,
Yeah.
it would be you're overthinking it. Like
Yeah, and
just
I've had good luck.
like
I can claim I discovered a star, although she would probably be correct to dispute me. But Chiara Manganelli, who's at UConn Stores in Connecticut, she's been a leader in nanograv and the pulsar timing experiments.
yeah.
Had some really interesting results on stochastic backgrounds, gravitational waves, and she was on my podcast about 2 years ago, and then just recently I saw her pop up on Sean Carroll's podcast.
Mhm.
I was pretty proud that I got to her first, and
Yeah, I mean,
she's an amazing.
sometimes you'll have these conversations with these people and other people will realize how well spoken they are, and but again, it's sort of like if you can help them move their careers forward, that's wonderful, and that's a really nice side benefit. But it it's more about you finding a name, finding a topic like that is exciting to you and you're curious about, and then finding one name and then start talking
Really. Yeah,
to
and I
that
have some
to pick
advantage.
one of those people at random.
It just, yeah, I mean, I actually know one of the lead professors on the project, so I'll probably have him on, or maybe one
Yeah.
of his colleagues. But so when you think about some of the questions that are coming in, this is from Billy McBride, the entertainer. Billy's asking, what is the next scientific revolution? So if you had to put your kind of
Hmm.
predicting hat on, maybe not astronomy, maybe anything else, but what would you say is the next scientific revolution? And don't say astrology
Well,
like you did in private. That was
oh, well, okay. Well, there's that. No, I mean, I think when I think about the impact that computer science is having and artificial intelligence, we recently got a result that artificial intelligence was able to map a whole bunch of protein folding. Artificial intelligence was able to figure out some new linear algebra calculation algorithms, which is pretty amazing. So it's this force multiplier that applies across every field. And I think in many fields, we're shifting from you can make a single observation with a really good tool to meta analysis of really large amounts of data. You're going to be studying a million type 1a supernova with
mm,
Vera Rubin to measure the expansion rate of the universe. A human being can't do that, but you can have a computer assist you as a very powerful tool that you can work together to come to the answer. So I think the once we start to apply the computational power of computers to the kinds of questions that we have, I think we're going to see another revolution in across the sciences. And right now, most science, and I'm sure the science that you do, it's just done as a very manual process.
right, right.
But imagine you could feed 1 billion stars from Gaia data into a supercomputer, some kind of learning algorithm, and go like, what's in there? What's interesting in there? And you could see some really interesting patterns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And I wonder, from the just whetting of the appetite. I mean, I was a uh, beginning college, I think, when Hubble was launched, and wasn't really sure I wanted to do astronomy back then. And I wonder, if you look at Webb now, for the young people that are alive now and have the opportunity, are there things that that have only just begun to scratch the surface of your cerebral cortex in terms of what Webb could do, or are there things that you're like, if I could, break their wall of silence and get their embargo lifted just for me, and I'm a journalist as you are, rather. So, what would you want to know? What kind of subject or capability that we know that Webb probably has is latent and is most interesting to you to hopefully find out about soon?
Yeah, I mean, I think where I get pretty like Webb is phenomenal. It's gigantic, 6.5 meters compared to Hubble's 2.6 meters.
Yeah.
It can see out it can do a Hubble deep field in any direction in like half an hour. It's incredible, but it still has its limit, right? It still is only so large. I mean, it's not going to be the telescope that's going to find, or it's going to be able to look at the surface of other Earth-sized worlds orbiting around sun-like stars and tell us what they're eating for breakfast. But when you match up the power of Webb with gravitational lensing, you're adding this additional telescope lens in front of Webb that gives you like another 10,000 times resolution to be able to see objects that are behind it. And then we start to see the first stars forming in the universe. There's some really interesting periods after the cosmic microwave background, before the period of reionization, before the first galaxies were coming together, when a lot of big mysteries about the universe are hidden.
Mm.
And I'm quite excited about how the way we learn some amazing things by by Hubble using gravitational lensing. Once Webb starts using gravitational lensing more dependably, I think it's going to be next level again. I think and I really feel like they're underselling it. Like, they're not talking about it,
Right.
but you take Webb and you stare at a gravitational lens that only Webb can see, you're seeing something that is magnified behind it, that it would take a Louvre to be able to see.
Right. No, it's so exciting, and then of course, what the capabilities are really not known. But one thing that you and I talked about in our most recent conversation, capabilities that maybe Webb doesn't have that some people think it does have, and this
Yeah,
parlayed into a discussion of the Big Bang and its possible non-confirmation by a man by the name
I've
of Eric.
heard that. I've heard that the Big Bang has been canceled.
Yeah, I bunked it. I don't know if that's the proper term, but it was debunked, and then I bunked it, and then but it's kind of unresolved. I put a
Is
poll
that
up.
what it is? You rebunked it. You rebunked the Big Bang.
Gotta
Yeah,
bunk it.
yeah.
Not just for beds anymore. And I put a poll up on my website, my YouTube channel, and I asked people in the community tab, who won the debate? The Big Bang supporters or the Big Bang never happened supporter. It was about 2 to 1 maybe. There was a little bit of kind of margin of error. Getting into the election season down here in America, you may know, and there's always a margin of error, but it wasn't like 100 to 0 for either side, which was kind of surprising to me. And I know Eric's
Yeah.
learner is probably listening out there. Hello, Eric. But the question of can you resolve something scientifically in a debate format? I've had some debates. I always feel like debates, and Martin Rees, who's an upcoming guest on my show, he's basically of the opinion that debates are pointless. I wonder.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. So, but what do you think that scientists have an obligation to the public? In other words, there are all these papers published that Lerner took and used the title "Panic at the Discs" and blah
Hmm.
blah, and use that to stir up kind of this notion that astronomers are in chaos and there are all these anomalies we can't explain. It's true, there are anomalies we can't
Hmm.
explain, but that's the whole point of science. What role should debates have? Obviously, they have to be done with comedy, and a little comedy never hurts. What should a debate be used for, if anything?
Well, I think I think that's what's really important is the way the scientific method works. That skepticism and debunking one another is the table stakes for being a scientist. Like, you're you're going to be presenting information, and you're, as you again probably are aware of, your colleagues are going to descend on you like a pack of hyenas to tear apart every single statement that you make. It makes you stronger. It makes you better. It makes you go into your research very carefully, knowing that you're going to have to defend every single scrap of data that you have gathered and every conclusion that you make. There are no fields that have that level of rigor um, and sort of combaticism. I don't know how you describe it, with each other, like science. And yet here we are talking on the internet, using lasers, hard drives. I'm using a satellite system to be able to communicate with you. Like, we are the beneficiaries of this powerful philosophy of science and the scientific method that was really only developed since the Renaissance. I mean, it's only been cranking for a couple hundred years, and yet here we are. And it's only by adhering to the scientific method that we get there. Um, and I think that the scientific method is so powerful and so effective that it has shaken other philosophies, other beliefs, other systems, ways of knowing. And it's not like it's been targeted. It's just a side effect
Hmm.
that that the theory of evolution is so strong and so well defended and has so many independent lines of evidence that people will it will question the beliefs that they were raised with. And
Right.
that's not science's problem. Science is not coming after people and saying, all that stuff that you were taught, it's not true. They're just saying, hey, look, these life forms seem to be related to those life forms. This is how life probably works. And I think that that process is so important. And
Mm.
I just feel like that is the what we can sort of all take from it.
Right.
And I don't know, like it's got to affect the way you think, right? Like the way you interact with your colleagues is just
Definitely.
someone says something to you, like the Big Bang isn't real or whatever, and your mind just kind of goes, okay, so what's your evidence? Da da da, right?
Yeah.
It's
But I think it's very valuable. In other words, there's a concept in Judaism. I'm Jewish, and there's a Talmudic expression which is called, basically it goes, know how to answer a heretic, which kind of has a lot of loaded terms in it. But the
yeah.
bottom line is, and I don't think I do a good job. I don't think we as a community of professional scientists do a great job of just with like the background foundations. I have an opportunity, once every 6 years to ask like any question in physics to a graduate student on whose committee I'm serving. Right. So I love to do like the general question. So I'll ask them, how do we know that I usually phrase it in the form of something provocative. I'll say, I believe the sun orbits the earth. Prove me wrong. And they'll be like,
Mhm.
first they'll be like, ah, I'll be like, no, no, really, prove me wrong. I believe that
Yeah,
the universe
yeah,
is 5,783 years old. Prove me wrong. And actually, I was
yeah.
in Italy last week, and I had the opportunity to talk to Professor Luke Barnes, who's a professor in Western Sydney, Australia, who is a remarkable person in that he's a legitimate hardcore theoretical physicist, but he grew up a young Earth creationist. And he
Mm,
and I talked about religion. He's Christian. I'm Jewish, but we had a lot to say, and we were kind of at a workshop where we were talking about the possible debates between religion and science, and he's obviously a hardcore science, but he overcame the young. I mean, his father was a minister. I can't wait for you to see this interview. He's such an interesting guy
yeah, it
in
sounds
the Young
amazing.
Earth
Yeah.
Creation Church in Australia, and yet he went to Cambridge. He ended up working. He's an incredible scientist. He overcame the belief that the universe is young, but I think it's very valuable to have that experience to know, like, well, how do we know the Big Bang is the most accurate, not infallible, not 100%, certainly not
Mm,
disproven. And sometimes, as one of the professors who was there at this meeting, who's not either, I think I would call him agnostic, as Freeman Dyson was an agnostic, an actual agnostic, not just says I'm an agnostic, so that the theists
mhm.
don't try to convert me more, or the atheists don't think I'm a rube. But one of the
Yeah.
professors there, I won't say who he is because hopefully I'll do an interview with him someday. But he said, no, it's important to ask questions, even about evolution, even about Darwin, even about
Oh,
DNA,
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
because it's where the cracks come in that the light gets in, right? As what's it, Leonard Cohen used to say, that's how the light
Yeah.
gets in. And I think in this case, I want more of my students to teach the controversy. So it's not that the Earth is flat or something, but it always does kind of devolve into matters of taste. And I think what I think both of our audiences like is that we're talking about actually hardcore, the cutting edge of technology, and we're not afraid to take on these controversies, even things like are aliens visiting us to this day, right?
Yeah, well, I think that your responsibility as a scientist is to do science,
Yeah.
and I think that a lot of people unfairly are asking more from a scientist than doing science. It's like asking a mechanic to be a philosopher. Like their responsibility is to fix cars, and all of the work that goes into the point that they can fix a car, and then they fix cars. Now they're free to go beyond that and talk about the philosophy of fixing cars and but I think that there is like an because whether a car is fixed or not fixed doesn't crash into somebody else's worldview, it's an uncontroversial job. But when science crashes into someone's worldview, it's not the scientist's problem. It's not their fault. They are like, obviously, if they're proselytizing, if they are going and attending church and then standing up in the middle of the church and telling everybody that they're idiots for believing in their God, that's bad. That's wrong. But in many cases, the scientist is not doing any of that. The scientist is just like going like, I looked at a black hole
Mhm.
and this is what and here's what I saw. Now I'm going to go look at now I'm going to go look at the Big Bang, and here's what I'm going to see. And it's the people with the worldview who are taking offense, who are using this as a chance, as an existential crisis for them. But that's a them problem, not scientists' problem.
Yeah.
And I think my job as a science communicator is to help assist in explaining the science that is getting done in the most honest way that I can, and to take some of that load off the
Yeah.
scientists because they're busy doing the science. It would be literally like the mechanic having to defend every time they
Although, I
swapped out an engine on a
to push
car and
back
be like,
with respect as I always do. I was in, as I said, I was in Florence. I went to Galileo's, final home slash prison, which is quite nice. And I think, Jeffrey Epstein would have loved to be in a prison like that. But when I was there, I realized that, Galileo, not only did he, kind of go against the orders of the church, he kind of disobeyed like on a
totally.
friendly, kind of proposition from Pope Urban. I said, look, you can study it. You can study heliocentrism, but that meant doing things in Latin. That was, I mean, Fraser and I, of course, know Latin. We can
Yeah.
communicate flawlessly. But back then, that was the language of scientists and specialists, and Italian was the language of the people. And they said, just as long as you don't publish anything in Italian. A couple years later, the Dialogo, which is not which is not Latin, that's Italian, comes out, and then it was so amazing to me to be in this, and it was a prison. I mean, there are bars on the windows. There was a guard out front, but it made it so important to me to see that he was a communicator. Fraser. He wrote
Hmm.
another book. I've published the first ever audiobook with Jim Gates and with Carlo Rovelli, Frank Wilczek, Fabiola Giannotti, and others of his dialogue, the dialogue that got him into trouble. But then he published another book called The Discourse, and he did that under house arrest, and it was a prison. And
Yeah.
but somehow Fraser, under penalty of death. I mean, he was imprisoned under penalty of suspicion of heresy, not heresy. He would have been killed, but it was suspicion of heresy, which I guess is a technicality. But if he got this, now he actually had all the pages smuggled out. It's 400 pages long, and it was smuggled to the Netherlands, where it was published by Elsevier, which publishes a lot of journals nowadays, still in print.
That's
So
amazing.
he
But
risked his
like,
life to communicate to the public, and I think that's yeah,
yeah, I mean, like, Galileo was picking fights, though. Like,
yeah. He
Galileo was absolutely picking fights. He was absolutely
kind of a schmuck
pushing
at
the
some point. I
boundaries.
love him, but he's a
Yeah,
schmuck, lovable schmuck.
and he was the equivalent of standing up in the middle of the church and telling everybody that they're wrong and they're idiots. And he was right in this case about the observations that he had made. And but if he hadn't done that, the discoveries that Galileo had made would have come out 10 years later by Cassini or by, right, they were inevitable because they are hidden in nature itself, and there's only so long you can go trying to have your philosophy overcome nature.
Right.
Nature wins out in the end every single time. And so, again, if you are going to set your philosophy, set your belief system against nature, that's a you problem.
Yeah.
That's nature is going to show you how wrong you are every single time.
Yeah.
Um, and so I do think that there is bad science, and there are bad conclusions, and there are bad actions that get taken from science. But I do think that at the end of the day, it's a scientist's job to do science,
Yeah.
and
No, I
and
agree.
I think we place too much, or people place too much emphasis on them attempting to needing to communicate what they're doing better. But at the same time, I think that people like you, people like Sabina, people who want to communicate and help make this stuff make more sense to people is a wonderful instinct.
Yeah.
You're going to pay a price in that it's going to take time away from you being able to do science, but the benefit that you get is you are potentially inspiring more people out there to do science, to understand what's going on, to think critically, to and there's and that's always my kryptonite. It's always my greatest weakness is that I'm not a cosmologist.
Right.
I can't go right to first principles and explain something because I can do the math.
Right.
And it's really valuable. A lot of authority can come from a person who can do the math.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I always say that, what I do during the day, I have to talk to contractors in Chile or the South Pole, or I have to talk to, some diesel supplier. And it's very little, pondering the universe, scratching my non existent Fraser Cain like beard. But
Yeah.
I do feel like it's, those are the people I have to talk to. Including
Yeah.
telecons, of which I have one in a few minutes anyway. But I'm going to go long. They're going to let them wait for a little bit.
I've got to go at like half past. So
Okay,
whatever
yeah,
you
yeah,
do, I got to
I
run
got it,
and
yeah.
okay.
So I'll see your half past, but I'll say I got to go at a quarter past. How about that?
Okay. Perfect. Yeah.
That's the ultimate flex. But the bottom line is when I get to talk to people like you, I get to talk to the Nobel laureates. So it's a privilege, and I do find that only gets better, as the more I kind of have cultivated a little bit of a reputation for kind of just going after a niche, which is cosmology, which is science. But I've lately started to branch out. I have Neil Ferguson, who's a historian at Stanford,
Hmm.
coming on. Jay Bhattacharya is coming on. He does a lot of stuff with the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm not afraid to do that. But on the other hand, there is also this kind of niche thing that is good to kind of dial into. I wonder now, we have a lot of questions from the audience, and then I have my patented final four questions that I'm
Hmm.
going to
Hmm.
demand responses like a good journalist should
Yeah. Yeah.
of
Yeah. Hold
you.
me. I mean, like when you talk to those people that you're going to be, they're fairly, I know who they are. They're controversial.
Yeah,
Be a scientist.
yeah. Yeah, no, I mean the thing for me is like, and at this conference, it was very surprising to me, Fraser, because I consider myself a practicing atheist, a practicing agnostic. That's a Freudian slip, probably. But in that I go to like a temple, like in San Diego
Mhm.
downtown. I go to, I do things. I keep kosher, but like, are there evidence? Do I ever doubt my faith? And at this conference, there were many, many. Scientists, professors, very well known people, some of whom will come on the show at some point, and people like Francis Collins wasn't there, but he's like a very religious person, obviously. But I
Mhm.
wonder, I asked them like, do you ever doubt your faith? Expecting them to say, and I asked that of the atheists too. I said, do you ever doubt your atheism? Because like we see a baby born, like, because they'll always say, well, you see a baby born with a deformation and cancer, like, why would God do that? So that's the classic problem of theodicy, right? But is there
Mhm.
anti-theodicy? Like you see, like a butterfly come out of a chrysalis. Like I once asked, like one of these my very good friends who's extremely pro-choice, and she's just so devoutly pro-choice, and I respect pro-choice up to a point. We can debate. That's not what this podcast is about, right? But I was saying like she told me like one of her kids bought like a butterfly kit where you get these little caterpillars, and they're so cool, and then like literally you put them in, they turn into a chrysalis, and then like one day they just start to hatch and come out. And I said, I won't use her name. I said to her, like, how would you feel? You see this beautiful chrysalis, and it emerges and it transforms from this like hairy, this squiggly thing like a snake, and then it starts to fly. And like, what if I came up to it and I just like crushed it, like right in front of her? She goes, I would kill you. And I was just like, but like, can you see where some people on the other side have, and she's like scientifically minded, can you see where they might have? So I love to ask them questions. Is there anything I could do to shake your faith in your position? Yeah, to Jay, I'm going to ask him, Jay Bhattacharya, like maybe you were wrong to publish this study in like 3 weeks after. But the thing that is so interesting to me, Fraser, is that they will have these talks, but someone like I can't imagine like Richard Dawkins, like he would be in welcome at this conference, but I don't know if he would come. And I don't know if he would invite any of them to like his conference. Anyway, you don't have to respond to that
Mhm.
because we have a lot to cover still. But yes, I will
Yeah.
hold their
Yeah.
feet
I mean,
as not as a
for
journalist, but as a
me,
scientist. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, like for me, it's just about evidence. So just like whatever, like, people ask me about UFOs. Like, do you believe in UFOs? And
Yeah.
I don't. I am unconvinced by the evidence. So, um, have I- and if someone says, "Well, my father saw a UFO," I'm like, I don't find that convincing.
Right.
Like, I'm sure your father found it convincing, and you find it convincing that your father found it convincing, but that is not enough for me to be convinced that your father actually saw an alien spacecraft
Right.
fly down to Earth. I can
Right.
imagine a bunch of alternative scenarios, and as long as I can, how do we figure out what's true and what's not true? And so for all of anytime anyone makes a truth claim to me, I have to figure out a method of discerning what's true and what's not true.
That's right.
And that is the same technique about everything.
Yeah.
Is just and so I think it's really dangerous to say I think this thing is wrong. I
Right.
think it's disingenuous. I think it's not helpful. And
Yeah.
and but
No,
I
I
think it's
agree.
perfectly acceptable to say I am unconvinced by the evidence you have presented to me so far about your UFOs.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I have
but
a
I
video.
can't wait to be proven wrong. Like, please
Yeah.
show me that I'm wrong. Deliver me the evidence. And usually it's just silence,
Yeah.
right? Because they don't have any evidence, so it's fine. Like, but you can't. You're not gonna guilt me. You're not gonna threaten me. You're not gonna kowtow me into
Yeah.
believing something that I don't have enough evidence for yet. But
Right.
I want to keep a dramatically open mind about what's there and what's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I've had on been on Jeremy Reese, who's an alien scientist. He's in the chat room. He's a good supporter of the show. He's incredibly energetic, very passionate, and he and I and I give him his due. He had me on his channel. I'm more on the slightly on the skeptical scale, and he was genuine about it and generous about it, gracious, etc. But at the end of the line, I have a video on my channel that said, "Astrophysicist professor, I don't believe in gravity. I don't believe in gravity. I have evidence for gravity." And I think
Right.
that
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah,
thing we need.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a question from Andy Oates, who's a great friend of my show. He's a subscriber to your channel as well. He and another member in the chat room, one of your best videos, in my humble opinion, is about ion drives. It's one of your most popular videos. We want to talk about space technology. Andy's asking, will
Mhm.
Artemis take off in November, or will it sit oxidizing into 2023? So, first of all, what excites you about
Yeah.
space technology and the space race that's going on today? Do you think we're going to reach Mars? First, answer about Artemis, sorry, and then will it take off? And
Okay.
then, second
Will
of all,
Artemis?
are we going?
Yes, I think Artemis will launch in November. And in fact, I think it'll launch on the first try. So I think
Wow,
November, was it 13th, 14th? I think it's going to launch. There's nothing left.
right,
Unless another hurricane bears down on Florida, then it's going to launch. They've looked through all of their fueling problems. They've troubleshot every single thing that's going to make them. And there's a ton of pressure. They've got go fever for sure. And because there's no human beings on board, I think they're going to err on the side of let's just go. So I do think it's going to launch. I think it's going to beat Starship by
wow,
far.
wow.
Um, I think Starship is like Musk said it might launch in November. But like you have to multiply Musk time for everything. There's 33 separate Raptor 2 engines strapped together in a configuration that's never been attempted. It feels like there are more tests that they're going to want to do before they actually let that monster get off the launch pad. I still sort of hold by my completely unscientific prediction that they're not going to launch till March ish.
Okay.
So, but we'll see if I can't wait. Again, I can't wait to be wrong. Like in the perfect world, Starship launches and is perfect, and SLS launches and is perfect, and people have a really difficult time figuring out what they're going to do from this point forward.
Hmm.
But to see two super heavy lift rockets take off within a few days of each other would be the greatest thing ever. I'm just not.
Yeah. And what about
I just am
his
not
ultimate
convinced.
Musk's ultimate goal of going to Mars? I mean, do you feel like that is a legitimate? Is there scientific legitimacy, or even sustenance of human life on Earth, which is his primary mission? What do you make of that ambition that Musk has?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can't wait for there to be a base on the moon. I can't wait for there to be a base on a asteroid, a base on Mars, where you've got human beings living there doing scientific research. But I don't think it's ever going to be beyond what we have in Antarctica.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
like there is a scientific reason to go to these places, if nothing just to send human beings to other planets, but it is not to try and send a million people to live on Mars. Like if we could do our very, very best possible job of making Mars, like we terraformed Mars and we grew plants on Mars, it would still suck compared to Earth. And after a while, that's just got to get exhausting. Where you're
Mm,
just like, you know what's a place that's like a terraformed Mars? It's Earth, and you were right there all along.
that's right.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly
so
what
I
I
think
said to
no, I
upcoming guest on the show, Lex Friedman. I
mhm.
told him on his show, I said, what happened the day after life is discovered somewhere in the universe, some slime mold on, Vesta. And he said, what? I said, absolutely nothing. Like, I could go
Yep,
out to the Pacific
100%.
Ocean, 10 miles away, and I could scoop up some life. And you know what? You're right. Yeah, Antarctica, I've been there twice. I spent a month or more of my life there. The South Pole you'd have to pay me to go back to. The coast is pretty
Right.
cool. There's
Yeah,
penguins there. Yeah,
and the
but not
South
the
Pole
South
is
Pole.
a
It's boring as all.
thousand times more habitable than Mars. Like
Easily,
it's a thousand times more pleasurable than Mars.
easily. Okay, let's take
Yeah.
some more questions from the audience. So feel free to type in your question underneath in the live chat. You can also find more information about Fraser on his channel. I put a link to that there. I'll put links to my appearances on Universe Today with Fraser in the past years. Let's see. Was math discovered or invented? That's his Arndith Batra. Do you believe
Hmm.
mathematical ideas, are they discovered or are they invented by humans?
I have no opinion.
Okay.
I mean, if it was discovered, like, are the math are is 1 + 1 = 2? Is that a thing that exists in the universe, or was it invented by human beings? I'm gonna. I mean, I'm gonna lean on the side of them being invented
Hmm.
because we do math, and sometimes we do math that doesn't work. But I think, and you can go back. Like, isn't there like you can go right back and prove that 1 + 1 = 2? So you can
Yeah, it's
sort of.
about a
But there's
200
like a
page long proof. Yeah.
yeah, but it was like a foundational assumption, right?
Yeah.
But I don't really have an opinion either
Yeah.
way. I don't.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna have some more. I've had a few mathematicians. I've had Stephen Strogatz. I've had Jim Simons. I'm having Ed Frankel, who wrote a wonderful book called Love and Math. He's coming on the podcast in the near future. Stay tuned for that.
Yeah. Do
Question.
you have an answer for that? Invented or
Um,
discovered?
the answer is yes.
Okay, perfect.
It's
Okay,
both.
good. Yeah, so
Yeah,
my
it's both.
ambivalence is right. Okay, good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because there is sort of a purity. Now, what's so interesting to me about this conference, and that's why I like to go to things that I don't necessarily talk to people I don't necessarily agree with, and that's because you hear things like there was a eminent. If I told his name, I mean, he probably doesn't care if I told it, but he's at Harvard in their molecular biology and math, and does all this incredible. And he basically went through methodically this whole proof that God exists based on math. And I
Mm,
mean, it wasn't like really a crazy crackpot. I mean, Einstein said things. Galileo, hometown whose hometown we're in. God is a mathematician of the very highest order. Eugene Wigner, what is the essence to explain to human beings the unreasonable effectiveness of math to physics? It's a puzzle. It's a mystery. Anyway, I want to get more into technology now. Andy Oates asks, "What's your opinion about thorium rocket engines, or can you give us an update on your ion drive? What excites you about space? Like besides these ginormous rockets, what other technologies are needed to enable us to go to planets or or stars beyond our solar system?"
well, I mean, ion drives. This is the idea of having ionized particles, usually like xenon, krypton, and you blast it at the back of your rocket using an electric field, and you get very high accelerations in return. But it's on a particle by particle level. So the actual force coming out of an ion engine is very low, but the efficiency is very high. And when you're considering the tyranny of the rocket equation, efficiency is
Yeah.
the most important thing. So you can accelerate to really high velocities over long periods of time by firing your ion engine. There's a new type of ion engine that's being developed by NASA that's going to see existence in future missions. So there's some more powerful ones out there. And when you connect a fusion reactor to ion engines, you get a pretty great technology stack. You've got really high efficiency, limitless amount of power with ion engines capable of using that power to accelerate your propellant out. I think if there's going to be missions going to and from Mars, we're going to see ion engines play a role in that.
Hmm.
But I think that the revolution in rocketry right now is what's happening with SpaceX with Starship, the idea of a fully reusable two-stage rocket system.
Hmm.
Like if you didn't have to throw your rocket away every single time, that
Right.
you could just um, use the like just the cost of the fuel each
Right.
time to launch a rocket, you can bring down the cost of launching things by an order or two of, several orders of magnitude, which makes a lot of missions which seemed impossible in the past suddenly start to make sense.
Right. Which brings us
Launching
circle
propellant
to,
depots, things like that. So I think it's not going to be complicated. It's going to be really simple. Like it's but it is rocket science.
yeah, it is.
Building the fully reusable two-stage rocket is going to be is what's going to be exciting.
Which brings us, full circle to what got you into space, which was the shuttle missions, which were pioneered to bring us to space on a weekly basis or whatever. Never really
Yeah.
panned out for a
Yeah,
variety of
exactly.
reasons we're not going to get into. One thing we need to have, and that people are curious about in the chat room, is the human being going to Mars. So Martin Rees, when he was on the podcast recently, said Elon Musk wants to die on Mars, and Elon, and then he said to Elon, I hope it's not on impact. But there are these, kind of there. And I also asked him, like, how does it feel to be the astronomer royal to the king now? Because he used to
Yeah.
joke that his job was to tell the queen her horoscope. So you'll hear some of that in a couple of weeks when I process the episode. But anyway,
Oh, that's amazing. That's
getting
so
to Mars,
funny.
we might
I
have
love
to
it.
like put people in suspended animation, like what was that movie a couple of years ago? So I wonder, can you answer, kind of the human question before we turn to final questions and then wrap up? How are we can actually physically get a human being 2 years or perhaps longer, maybe much much longer to go to another star system? How is that possible?
Well, I mean, like within the solar system, flights of 2 years, you're taking a human being that was evolved under the protective magnetosphere of planet Earth and our atmosphere, and you're putting them out into the cosmic void. They're going to be getting hit by cosmic rays. They're going to be getting hit by radiation from the sun, and they're going to receive a lifetime's dose of radiation in just a few months.
Yeah,
The price they will pay is cancer
yeah,
and cardiovascular disease and problems with their eyes. Like in the same way that a test pilot takes on the risk of dying every time they strap into some new vehicle, they do it as a as one of the risks of their job. It's sort of like the same thing about a person who's going to climb Mount Everest. Like you know that there's a 15% chance you're just going to die when you climb that mountain, and that's just, and it's outside of your control. So there is no solution. And like maybe there'll be some long term, like in 200 years from now, we'll have technological solutions to solve all these problems. But until then, it is not a tourist trip to Mars. It is a potentially suicide mission for a lot of people, and almost certain health issues for everybody who attempts this journey. And think for a lot of people it's worth it. Like they're stoked
yeah,
to go to Mars, and they're willing to pay the price, which is that they're going to die young with cancer.
yeah,
And that's the sacrifice that they're willing to make to extend humanity's influence to other places.
yeah.
I wouldn't,
Right.
but they do. And I respect them for what they're willing to do. And I don't think there's anything more and I think that people just don't appreciate how dangerous it is, how unforgiving that planet is, how awful the journey is going to be, and how little reward we're going to have for actually being there.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, Fraser, we've reached the end of our regularly scheduled content, but I do always love to ask my guests who honor me by coming on
Mm-hmm.
with these four questions of fundamental existential reality. Okay, so the first one is relates to the namesake of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination that I am the associate director of. I have the honor of being the associate director of, and it has to do with his famous statement in the very movie 2001 Space Odyssey, which gave us the name podcast. I don't know if you know that. The podcast comes from the iPod, which came
Mm.
from the word pod bay doors, which I open every podcast with, and that's what Dave says to Hal, right? Okay. Anyway, getting around
Mhm.
that. So, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I want to ask you, what thing have you discovered in your peregrinations around the world of science and space that is most impressive, that is most magical, that is most technological, perhaps, that you would like to have humanity have a little bit of swagger in our collective steps about? What is the most impressive, most magical advanced technology?
Well, I think the like I see so many of these things that they sort of fall out of my brain as soon as I see them. But the thing that I've been mulling around with right now is artificial intelligence, content creation, generation. How you've got things that are writing words, drawing pictures. Uh, it's really unsettling to type in a text description of some scene and have a picture show up in front of you instantaneously. And
Yeah.
that really feels like it's bordering on magic to me. And I understand the underlying technology to some degree. Uh, it's so weird. And yet it felt like if you said like, when will you be able to say, computer, show me a picture of an astronaut riding a horse? When will that technology exist? A computer will just show you pictures of astronauts riding the horses. I would have thought it would have been 50 years from now. And
Right.
yet here we are.
Right.
And so to see things fall technologically so quickly, it's just, it's stunning to think about the future that we're rushing headlong into across all these fields of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to my grandmother, grew up in the shtetl of Eastern Poland, and, she was riding a horse and pushing a donkey cart, and she lived, to see men, grown men, twerking on TikTok. And to have that, Fraser, is just so exciting. Okay, next.
That would have been my second thing, would be TikTok. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
you love it. That's great. Okay, the next thing that I love to ask my guests who honor me. Actually, it has to do with not millions of years in the future, but maybe 70, 80 years in the future when you reach the biblical age of 120 years old. What
Mhm.
wisdom, not material goods, what wisdom do you want to put in what's called your ethical will? In other words, a gathering of knowledge, but really of wisdom that you can communicate to not just your biological relatives, but your ideological relatives. What would you like to leave for humanity to guide us in the future when you're no longer with us physically?
Well, I think the one of the things that got me into space and astronomy in the first place was this idea that we may or may not be alone in the universe, and that finding out an answer to that question is one of the most important. I think it's like the most scientific important question we can ask, and I would love to know that I helped get an answer to it,
Mm-hmm.
if possible.
Yeah.
And not, I mean, obviously, I'm not a scientist, so my job is to communicate. My job is to connect. My job is to help raise awareness that this is a scientific question, and that the search for the answers are fascinating and important. And I think if people can go back and say, "Oh, Fraser helped communicate when we thought it was stupid," Fraser helped us realize that it was important, I would feel like it's a life well lived.
That's wonderful. Okay, last two questions. Now, I want to ask you, also pertinent to Sir Arthur C. Clarke, who said the following: when a distinguished but elderly scientist says that something is possible, they are almost certainly right. But when he says something is impossible, they are very probably wrong. Now, I'm not calling you elderly, we're about the same age, but I want to ask you, Fraser, is there something you've changed your mind on? What have you most recently changed your mind on that maybe you were wrong about in the past?
Well, I think the thing that I've changed from, people who are my audience will know, we've talked a bit about that. The reason, the worthwhileness of sending humans to Mars, of us living. I read the case for, I mentioned earlier, the case for Mars inspired me
Yeah.
to get into this field, and the idea of us colonizing Mars was really exciting to me. And I think that now that is no longer interesting to me.
Mhm.
That the more I learn about our planet, the more I appreciate the more I learn about the universe, the more I appreciate the world that we happen to be on.
Right.
How isn't it weird that we are perfectly evolved to live on this planet? So
Right.
this is the best place in the universe,
Yeah.
and
Take
I'll
care
take
of it.
any aliens on if they disagree with me that their planet is better. But it's the best place for us. And so
Absolutely.
it's like you could search your whole life for a better place, and it turns out you were living there all along.
Yeah. And don't squander it. And I think that takes us to our
Yeah.
final question, Fraser. Now we're going to go backwards in time. No more going forward time traveling. Uh, Sir Arthur C. Clarke's so called third law states the only way of discovering the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. Now you know where I get the name of the
Mm,
podcast from. I want to ask you, what mysterious aspect of life? As I said, most of my audience is 20 to 50, 60-year-old men. I want to give you get your life advice to your former self. What would you do differently? What moments of great clarity or some inciting incident or something that was formative to you would you go back to, if you like, and give yourself advice to give yourself the confidence to do as you've done and go into the impossible? Advice to your former self.
yeah, I mean, I think I've been really fortunate that I've always been who I am. Like as a when I was in high school, I was running role playing games. I was I was the D&D nerd. I was enthusiastic and would never stop talking, and that shifted into various interesting careers and stuff. And so I was never ashamed to be into the things that I was. And I think that if I could go back and talk to younger Fraser, I'd be like, just double down, lean in. It's these things that you love, video games, space, are fine, and are you're not alone, and just do it. And I think that for me, back then you're more classified as a geek, as a nerd,
Right.
as someone who wasn't cool. And I it never really bothered me too much, but I think for a lot of people, they they do they can't be their authentic self. And I think if the sooner you can get into embracing your authentic self, the more fun you're going to have with life, for sure.
Absolutely. Fraser, I want to be completely honest. You are a true hero to many of us that are trying to do a very difficult thing, which is to increase science literacy. I think the future of the Earth depends on it. We are always, oh, how do we get more people in STEM? Well, one way is to make it accessible, make it fun, bring
Yeah.
some humor, because humor belies a sense of confidence that I think you really have this unique, as I said, your unfair advantage, which you exploit in the most benevolent of ways, is such a gift. And I want to encourage my audience to definitely subscribe if you haven't. Support him on Patreon. This is a very important mission. He employs many, many writers, and they have this mission, and it's so unified. And one of my favorites, I keep promising to have her on, Nancy Atkinson, who wrote 11 Years to the Moon, I think, and
Yeah.
have her on. You have this incredible staff. It costs money to keep that going. So please do support Fraser, subscribe to his channel, and the best thing of all is the you will reap the benefits of interacting with Fraser. The more you give, the more you'll get. Fraser, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Sorry I kept you so long, but it was too much fun to
No
cut.
problem. Yeah, the timing's good. I got 3 minutes. Right
Okay,
on.
my
Thanks,
friend.
Brian.
Take care. We'll
All
be in
right.
touch.
Take
Bye.
care.